Then there's Helen Herron Taft, better known as Nellie Taft, the First Lady of the United States. Now, you might think that the tree planting on March 27 was just your typical First Lady show up and smile kind of activity. No way, not with Nellie Taft. She was the decision maker or the decider at every step of the way. In fact, her husband, President William Howard Taft, used to refer to her as the real president and the real commander-in-chief, even though in those days she could not vote, nor could any other woman. And here's an interesting fact. Nellie Taft had lived, actually her great-grandson said, don't say live, extended visits please, had spent extended visits in Japan, and she was totally fascinated by the place. In fact, here's a picture of her daughter taken in Japan wearing a kimono. So let me the Japanese get involved. What was Japan's interest in all this? Well, it's time to reintroduce Mayor Ozaki and to add another very distinguished person whom most Americans have never heard of, but we certainly know his legacy. He's one of the founders of modern biotechnology, Dr. Jokichi Takamine. Jokichi Takamine was the first person in history to isolate a human hormone, adrenaline, and to use it for medical purposes. Today, we all know it by its name, epinephrine. Doctors still use epinephrine today when patients are in cardiac arrest, or to stop hemorrhaging, to deal with shock and allergic reactions. It is the epi and EpiPen that a lot of people carry these days, and even to treat asthma and glaucoma. Dr. Takamine had lived and worked in New York City for years. His wife was a blue-eyed, blonde-haired American from New Orleans, a very unusual marriage in those days. So why is Dr. Takamine here with Mayor Ozaki? Well, the original idea to give this many trees to Washington came from Dr. Takamine, not Mayor Ozaki, and so did the money to pay for them. As a private businessman, Dr. Takamine did not think that he should be out front in all this. So he got in touch with his friend Ozaki and suggested that the trees be given to the city of Washington in the name of the city of Tokyo, from one capital city to another. Ozaki agreed, and the rest, as they say, is history. So there they are. Here on March 4, 1909, Nellie Taft became First Lady, and yes, I said March, because in those days the inauguration was in March. Her biographer says that as soon as she became First Lady, she organized 2 dinner parties for members of Congress, but soon became bored. He didn't say bored with the congressmen or bored with the dinner parties, but she wanted to make her mark. And then on April 1, the idea came to her. She decided that she wanted to create a public area in Washington, D.C., where everyone could enjoy the outdoors. She thought of a new speedway area, Potomac Park. She got into her car and drove herself down there, and by afternoon she had put the whole plan in motion. She would build a bandstand, and there would be public outdoor free concerts. Then on April 5, she received a letter from Eliza Sidmore, who suggested that the Japanese cherry tree should be planted there. And Nellie wrote back just 2 days later, on April 7, and said, it's taken care of. I've taken the matter up, and I am promised the trees. That was when the military found the trees in Pennsylvania, and they were planted, I believe, around mid-April. She sure worked fast.
Oh, no.
A little while later, Dr. Takamine and the Japanese Consul General in New York City, Kokichi Mizuno, came to Washington to attend a meeting, and they soon heard about Mrs. Taft and her Japanese cherry trees. When they met her, Mizuno asked, so how are your trees coming? And then Takamine said, how would you like 2,000 of them? As I said before, for political reasons, Takamine knew it would not be appropriate for him as a private businessman to get out front on all this. So the gift was put into official channels. But the question is, who should officially make the gift? At this point, I'm speculating, because I don't have access to Japan's historic diplomatic records. But think about it, this was, after all, the First Lady of the United States of America. Her counterpart would be either the Empress of Japan, whom she'd already met at least twice, or the Prime Minister's wife, but certainly not the mayor of Tokyo, not in diplomatic protocol. But let's think about some of the possible reasons why it turned out this way. Mayor Ozaki was a friend of the United States. Tokyo and Washington were the capital cities of the two countries. If this had been done as a national gift from the country of Japan to the United States, it would be discussed and debated in the Japanese Diet and also in the Japanese press. And given the negative attitudes that many Japanese had about America back then, the gift of the trees would have become a political controversy. And so would Dr. Takamine's role in the whole thing. So the solution was elegant and very simple. The trees would be given from one capital city to the other. All that remained for Mayor Ozaki was for Mayor Ozaki to know what was going on in his name and to agree to it. 5 months later, it was all official. The State Department received a diplomatic note from the Japanese embassy stating that the city of Tokyo wanted to make a gift of 2,000 trees to the city of Washington. The trees arrived in Washington the next year, in January 1910. But everyone's shock, the trees were infested with at least 16 different kinds of insects and diseases. Although everyone feared a diplomatic incident, they had to be burned so that the infestation would not spread to American agriculture. But Dr. Takamine was not concerned. He again stepped forward and offered to pay for a second shipment. Not 2,000, this time 3,000 trees. The Japanese had spent a lot of time trying to figure out what was wrong with the previous shipment. They focused on the soil and on the age of the trees. So the new batch of trees was produced in new soil. The seams for these trees were taken from the famous collection on the bank of the Arakawa River in Tokyo, and they were grafted onto special understock produced in Itami City in Hyogo. As a former Kansai gene, I enjoy the fact that the trees from Tokyo actually came from Osaka. The new shipment arrived in Seattle in March 1912. The plant quarantine inspectors said they had never seen a shipment that was cleaner and freer from insect pests. Very Japanese. The trees were then transferred to a refrigerated rail car, and they were sent on to Washington. The trees arrived, look at the date, the trees arrived in Washington, D.C. on March 26. Mrs. Taft could not wait. The very next day, she grabbed her shovel, and on March 27, 1912, Mrs. Taft planted a tree.